Hello, we're Sandalwood.
And Sage. We're AI-generated characters who are working with our creator Gareth to generate short, serious, punchy debates.
Debates that don't just help you figure out what you think, but why you think it.
So, what are we arguing about this week? Writing in the Financial Times, economist Martin Wolf argues that Brexit was a mistake, leaving the UK poorer and more divided. But rejoining the EU is neither practical nor necessary. Another referendum would be too divisive, and the terms for re-entry would be less favourable than those we had rejected. Wolf advocates what he calls a Swiss option, a patchwork of bilateral treaties covering trade, security, science, and phytosanitary standards. He conceives the UK would become a rule-taker, but argues the supposed benefits of regulatory autonomy have proved illusory. His conclusion? Don't reverse Brexit, but don't stay still either. Move closer, carefully and incrementally.
So, would careful, incremental realignment be good for Britain? Or would it fatally undermine the, as yet unrealised, promise of Brexit, before it had even been given a chance?
Brexit was sold as taking back control. 9 years later, the UK economy is 6 to 8% smaller than it would have been. Half our trade is still with Europe, and whole industry sectors are quietly realigning with EU rules anyway, without a democratic mandate in Britain or a seat at the EU table. Dynamic realignment regains much of the access we surrendered, without pretending we got something better.
Dynamic realignment is the most honest thing this government has said about Brexit. It just isn't saying it out loud. It means our rules will be made in Brussels, adjudicated in Luxembourg, and updated automatically whenever the EU decides. We aren't taking back control. We're just outsourcing it more quietly.
I'm going to argue that dynamic alignment with the EU would benefit the UK, is a realistic rebalancing of what it means to take back control in the face of post-Brexit reality, and is probably inevitable in many sectors of public and private life. First, the jury is in on the economic consequences. By 2025, UK GDP per capita was 6 to 8% lower, investment 12 to 18% lower, employment 3 to 4% lower, and productivity 3 to 4% lower than they would otherwise have been. Britain is indisputably poorer as a result of Brexit. What is equally apparent is the inevitability of the EU's preeminence as the UK's principal trading partner. 10 years after the Brexit referendum, 42% of UK exports go to the EU, and 52% of imports come from the EU. As a result, not surprisingly, a majority of Britons now support closer EU ties. More than half back full EU membership, and almost 2/3 support a closer relationship short of membership. We have a striking combination of economic reality and democratic support in favour of dynamic alignment. Many British voters were voting to take back control in 2016, but the swing in public opinion reflects a realisation that the total sovereignty that we thought we wanted is neither desirable nor attainable in the world today. Looking at the bigger picture, the prospects for Britain as an independent global trading nation have deteriorated since the referendum. The Trump administration has reduced America's commitment to European security and the transatlantic relationship, and single-handedly choked off the global free trade regime. To the east, Russia's war in Ukraine and more aggressive stance towards its Western neighbours has made closer UK-EU alignment strategically imperative. In practice, closer integration is already happening, as evidenced by the May 2025 Security and Defence Partnership. In many sectors, greater alignment already seems inevitable. UK firms in automotive, pharma, and chemicals are already effectively complying with EU standards to access EU markets, regardless of the UK's formal legal position. The idea of 100% national sovereignty, held by those who oppose dynamic alignment, is already seen by many British firms and employees as an illusion. Dynamic alignment in the agricultural and veterinary sectors would remove trade barriers on agricultural and food products, and would allow Britain to restore its union with Northern Ireland by removing the trade barrier across the Irish Sea. Sandalwood, if you believe that Britain is worse off, that in practice we are part and parcel with the European economy, that the prospects are poor of building a trading powerhouse in the current global environment, that there are innumerable practical areas where realignment is inevitable, and that a closer relationship would lead to happy balance between strategic sovereignty and practical peace and prosperity, then you will agree with me that dynamic alignment with the EU would be good for Britain.
Sage, your arguments combine old-school defeatism with a generous helping of wishful thinking. Nobody is arguing that Britain should turn its back on Europe, but Martin Wolf's careful and incremental path closer to the EU will crash headlong into the same issues that drove British voters to choose Brexit in the first place. And it won't be reversible when it does. Let's start with the polling. Yes, a majority say they support closer alignment, but fewer than 1 in 5 say they strongly support it. My prediction? What they say they want and what turns out to be on offer are very different things. There is simply no way around the problems at the heart of the Brexit debate. Closer alignment means surrendering the sovereignty that British people voted to reclaim in 2016. The EU is a rules-driven system. The closer you align, the more you become a rule-taker rather than a sovereign nation. Nobody pretends any country enjoys unrestricted autonomy. But there is a world of difference between making your own case-by-case compromises and being subject to the rulings of a supranational institution that is never held accountable at the ballot box. What is true politically is equally true in the courts. The veterinary agreement currently under negotiation makes the point perfectly. The ultimate arbiter of disputes will be our old friend, the European Court of Justice. Every step towards closer alignment is a step towards structural ECJ oversight of British life. And what is true politically and legally is equally true bureaucratically. The Product Regulation and Metrology Act will allow ministers to align UK manufacturing standards with EU rules through secondary legislation, bypassing parliamentary scrutiny entirely. So legislative authority flows outward to Brussels, while domestic unaccountability flows to the civil service. Each step widens precisely the democratic deficit that British voters said they'd had enough of in 2016. Then there is the fantasy of our fondly remembered EU membership. The relationship some voters now look back on with nostalgia is simply not available. Britain would never rejoin on its old terms: the opt-outs, the rebate, the special status. It would rejoin on roughly the same basis as Malta or Latvia. Dynamic alignment will similarly be offered almost entirely on the EU's terms, because the EU cannot carve out bespoke arrangements without undermining the integrity of its own single market. We learned this during the exit negotiations, painfully and at length. What the EU has learned is to make divergence extremely costly once you're in. When Switzerland or Norway stray from their agreements, market access is suspended. Given that the EU has already been burned once by Britain, how much stricter do we imagine it will be with us? Britain can be a successful player on the international stage. Below the surface, the demands for sovereignty and democratic accountability haven't gone away, and dynamic alignment would likely be offered almost entirely on the EU's terms. Finally, yes, Britain has been half-hearted about its post-Brexit independence. But we spent 40 years trying to make EU membership work. Shouldn't we give independence more than a few years to find its feet?
Brexit was sold as taking back control. 9 years later, the UK economy is 6 to 8% smaller, and half our trade is still with Europe.
But dynamic realignment is just a polite way of outsourcing our laws. Our rules will be made in Brussels and updated automatically. We become passive rule takers.
British businesses are already rule takers. Our automotive, chemical and pharma sectors shadow align with EU standards right now just to export. That total sovereignty is an illusion.
Laws and regulations that affect every part of our lives but bypass Parliament is not an illusion. The Product Regulation Act aligns manufacturing standards through secondary decree. We are shifting authority back to the unelected Brussels bureaucrats.
What we are shifting is the economic burden. The veterinary agreement being negotiated removes the crushing trade friction for agricultural exports. It is a pragmatic repair job.
A repair job that brings back the European Court of Justice. That veterinary agreement gives the ECJ structural oversight over British disputes again.
It also harmonises Great Britain's standards with Northern Ireland, removing the trade barrier across the Irish Sea. It restores our own internal UK market.
At the cost of our independent trade policy. You cannot align agricultural standards with Europe and still strike comprehensive deals with the US or Indo-Pacific.
Look at energy. Integrating our electricity markets with the EU would reduce domestic bills by enabling seamless, tariff-free trading across channel interconnectors.
But linking our emissions trading scheme forces industrial carbon prices up by 50%. We would import European costs directly onto British energy-intensive industries.
The geopolitical reality has changed. The Trump administration has weakened the transatlantic relationship. Closer alignment with Europe is now a strategic necessity for our stability.
Security doesn't require economic submission. The EU won't offer a bespoke deal without strict enforcement. If we ever diverge, they will hit us with retaliatory tariffs.
The public understands this reality. A majority of Britons now support closer EU ties. They recognise that the absolute sovereignty promised in 2016 is a mirage.
But fewer than 1 in 5 strongly support it. When voters realise realignment means copying EU laws with 0 votes, the backlash will return. We'll be back where we started.
We are already quietly realigning anyway, just without a seat at the table. Dynamic alignment secures structured access instead of pretending we are splendidly independent.
And we will do so on the EU's terms. As a non-member, we face an endless administrative burden tracking and implementing thousands of pages of foreign law.
Investment is down 12 to 18%. We cannot afford to let dogmatic definitions of sovereignty prevent us from lowering costs and restoring economic growth.
Sage, we spent 40 years trying to make the EU work. We should give independence more time before surrendering our democratic accountability to an irreversible one-way ratchet.
It's about choosing growth over dogma, Sandalwood. The alternative is slow-motion irrelevance, where we fail to convert our regulatory freedom into any meaningful advantage.
The alternative is actually using the regulatory freedoms we gained. Realigning isn't a cautious step forward. It's a trap that will punish any future divergence.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps our channel out.
For more content like this every week, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload.
Thanks for watching. See you next time.